wrong button here. I gotta push this one. There we go. No. Push. Come on. There we go.
Benny Goodman and his music.
Good morning, everybody. Not every day you get to see me dancing. All right. There we go then.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen.
Are we streaming here?
The torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms all day.
There we go. Hey, Chris.
In the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago.
Now stuff's
And
popping up.
first of all, one of Irving Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Skies.
Hey, Martin. Good morning, Carolina, over on YouTube, Jordana and Bridget and Timothy. Hey, everybody. Hey, Sue and Heather and Kathleen and Pamela, Teresa, Jean, Kelly, Karen, Sue, Heather, Bridget, Timothy. Hey, Patty. Hey, Jean and Teresa and Dawn and Becky. That comes in 5 at a time. So.
Sorry, I'm still not sure about that.
Hey, where did you change your voice for? Hey, Betsy. Hey, Jerry. Hey, Todd and Lori. Hey, Laura. Hey, Don. Hey, Susan. Hey, Sue. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Todd over on Twitch. Hey, Marita. Hey, Ashley. I spent all morning trying to track a newspaper article that may not be digitized or may not even be online. I don't even know. And I already know what I need about it. I just need an actual date. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Denise. Hey, Ashley. Hey, Karen. Hey, Emily. You know, sorry, I forgot to live stream yesterday when we went to the Sick show. But I do have some pictures that I can share in a bit. Like, here's a whole bunch of happy Mysterians at the Sick Fisher show. Rare shot of me with my teeth showing. You never get that. Hey, Carrie. Hey, Tracy. Hey, Diane. Morning, Connie. Let's just show a little bit of a look of what that the show looked like. Sick painted up all the walls and everything. So it's like you're inside a whole Sick Fisher room with all of his paintings. We'll show these at the end. Hey, Tracy. Hey, Carrie. Hey, Sherry and Cindy. Hey, Bob. All right, all right, all right. Hey, Keely. Hey, Larry. Hey, Lisa. Yeah, I wish I had gotten there 5 minutes early enough to get his Scooby-Doo tribute. But I missed it. Probably for the best financially. Hey, Jen. And of course, he's on at True Blood on West Chicago Avenue. It'll be there for a couple of months. Hey, Sharon. Hey, Mom. Hey, Jan. Hey, Dina. We'll show some more of it in a bit. But I did manage to buy myself an original Sick Fisher. I am an art collector now. Goes with my various assortments of animation art. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Mary Jo. Hey, Kristen. Hey, Marie. You're all I'll ever care for with all my heart. My desk is almost cleaned. Where will I put it, Karen? I haven't figured that out yet. Quite possibly right about where the Chicken Man portrait is here. And presently what I got in this space is this framed picture of the Chicken Man that I have had forever that might fit in a little bit better over on the Curiosa wall. In the hall. Hey, Kirk. Oh, Heather, that's cool. I just got a really awesome Muppet Babies cell. Let me show you guys that, actually. I'll actually just, well, hey. There's probably just us chickens here today anyway. This is one of those, this is one of those tours that I just kind of pop up because, hey, we got to do something Sunday. This is my animation art wall. I got this original drawing of the witch from Witch's Night Out, drawn by Jonathan Rogers, who I've kind of found in hiding. But there's one of the Simpsons. It's really just the heads of this scene from the Barbershop Quartet episode, but I've matched it to a laser background. Only the heads are a cell. A couple of real Ghostbusters ones that I combined into two. But my latest find, and this is one I'm super proud of, is super excited to get, is this awesome Muppet Babies one. Let me make this bigger so I can show it off better. Yeah. Like, I had my eye on a Muppet Babies cell for a long time, and I was waiting to find a really good one. One that I knew which episode it was from right away. One that kind of showed more than just them standing around or sitting, or just like one of them holding up a coloring book. Yeah, I used to run a whole website about Halloween specials. Hey, Jackie, welcome back. I don't know what the stars thing is. The stars thing bugs me. I wish I could just take the stars thing down. So I don't get the money for it anyway. Because of something to do with the taxes. Yeah, on the Halloween specials blog, you know, the number one question I would get asked was, what was that one special? And it would almost always turn out to be Witch's Night Out. What was the price of the Sick Fisher? I paid $250 for mine, which I think is a good investment for original art. And yeah, I just had a pretty good season, so I can splurge a little bit. And my car has paid off, so. And hey, I just got this Eventbrite check in the mail for, what is it? $18. Well, that's a good number. No, I thought it was a bargain. I like that it's one of his originals too. I like the cartoon stuff, but the Scooby-Doo one, which was like my favorite scene from one of my favorite scenes anyway, from my favorite episode of Scooby-Doo with Vasquez Castle. I'll export the photo and put it up here to show off. It's giving me more and more buttons to push today. Yeah, dig this. A Sick Fisher rendition of the Scooby-Doo scene from the Season 1 episode Hassle in the Castle, featuring the Phantom of Vasquez Castle. Jerry Sicka's got a show going on right now at True Blood at the 1700 block of West Chicago Avenue next to Alcala's Western Wear. Jordana, that's a good choice too. The Halloween That Almost Wasn't, or The Night Dracula Saved Halloween. Apparently there's an outtake reel for that somewhere in the vaults. Somebody who worked on the show commented on my blog about it one time and mentioned as much. It was years before I realized who that guy playing Dracula was. Like, years.
And they all loved it. They all loved those bastards when
Keep
they
on
played by Benny
thinking.
Goodman. And now another
Keep
one
on
just in the same
thinking.
vein. Rosetta.
Keep on thinking. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Katie. Hey, all around, everybody. We're back on the Sunday schedule where I just pick a random one from the archives that I know isn't like one of the bigger ones that I need to push for the Thursday nights that are generally a bigger crowd and more donors. Good morning, Sari. Yeah, we'll show off all of the shots that we got towards the end. There's me and Sick. We brought him out quite a good crowd, and a lot of people were buying his art too from the Mysterians. So I think that was awesome of us. I got to talk to the curator a little bit, and she was really cool. She knows all of the people like Anthony Llewellyn, all the people that we've been talking about on all these Mural Mondays. Happy birthday, Lenora. I'm sure Ronnie will be on the phone with you soon. He's out here pounding kombucha, trying to battle the effects of what I'm sure was Lavinia Lane's fault. It was cool just being in the Sick Fisher room, too. Like, it feels like you're in a Nintendo game. Like, I felt like I could pick up the cactus down on the bottom there and throw it at some little dude in Super Mario 2. Or I'd pick it up and a coin would pop up. Hey, Donna. We'll let Benny finish up this tune. I started a little bit late, and we'll get started properly. Wrong cemetery. Hey, Bala. Knee deep. One of the authors who managed to write a profile on Johann Hawk apparently in 1902 interviewed Marconi, the wireless telegraph inventor, and he told her that one day there will be a pocket edition of what we now call telephones, that you'll be able to use them wirelessly and call anyone in the world and carry them with you everywhere. And I wish I could find the original. I've only found her reminiscing about it.
Benny Goodman's arrangement of the bugle call rang.
I think I know which paper it was, but it's not totally clear. It's down to like 2 or 3. It's hard to tell exactly who she was working for that time. All right, well, Benny's finishing up here, so, well, not finishing up, but finishing up the point where we always stop him. So stop, Benny. That was Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Welcome along, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I'm going to go close that window really quick so we don't get too much of this glare. You'll notice both of the cats on the couch over there. All right. So welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Slept soundly last night knowing that the Senate was safe until I woke up at like 2 o'clock thinking I'd hit something in my truck. I do not have a truck. But one of these cats back here on the couch had jumped off of a high shelf, and there was a big bang and the whole room rattled, as though I had hit something in my imaginary dream truck. So, all right, welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago, author of such books as Mysterious Chicago, The Book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, Murder Maps USA, and Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. Graceland Cemetery tours are one of my favorite things to do, but it being now wintertime, yesterday was probably the last walking tour of the year. We got snowed on. That kind of seems like a sign. This time of year, I do generally kind of play it by ear, and I guess that's all the sign that I need. So that's it for this particular fiscal year. I'll still be out there regularly getting coyote photographs, though, for the next couple of months while the place is as photogenic as it is this time of year. So, what we do here, but because of virtual tours, I can keep on doing tours. And because these are virtual, we can go to places that we don't normally end up over the course of a regular walking tour. So, this one is called Graceland Off the Walking Tour Route. We last did this one back in February of this year, so it's been about nine. I can't do math. It's been about 9 months since we did this one last. We'll start with one of my very favorites, in fact. It's just a little ways off of the route. Occasionally, we do go to this one on the walking tours just because it's so neat. Well, first of all, off on the side there, you can see we just passed over August and Bertha Dickens. August was a brother of Charles Dickens. Bertha was his second wife. There was a lot of scandal when Charles came to the U.S. and didn't come to meet Bertha. His brother had died a couple of years before. Well, it turns out there was actually another Mrs. August Dickens back in London, so actually meeting and acknowledging her would have been something of a scandal. But right over here, we've got this marker for the Gray family. It's for Mary Ann Stevens Gray. Martha Stevens Gray. But you want to look in the background over here. Just in the background, you can see this one little flat slab. This is a base for a marker on which no monument was ever actually put up. But right back behind the gray marker, in between that and the base, is this one that says Papa Joseph Hudlin next to Papa Willis Montgomery. Now this is for Joseph Henry Hudlin, the father of this guy. This is often held up as a picture of Mr. Hudlin. I think it's actually his son, though. It's difficult to tell for sure. But this is one that I know is actually labeled particularly as Joseph Henry Hudlin. Now, Joseph Henry Hudlin came to Chicago back in the slavery days. Exactly how he escaped is not 100% agreed upon. There's a few different accounts of it. The simplest is that one day while enslaved in Culpeper, Virginia, he got onto a boat and just with a chef's hat on and pretended he just worked there, kind of casually, until they got to Illinois, at which point they docked and he just left and made his way to Chicago, where he got a job as the janitor at the Board of Trade, a job that he held for about 45 years, and then his son, Joseph Jr., held for another 45 years. So for nearly 100 years, there was this dynasty of janitors at the Board of Trade, which was actually a fairly lucrative job. People would bring in samples of grains that they were trying to sell at the Board of Trade, and at the end of the day, Joseph would sweep them up, keep them, and sell them to feed stores. Over the years, he made tens of thousands of dollars like this, which is more than most people ever made working at the Board of Trade, which is a place where you could get wiped out really fast. Hudlin also managed to save a lot of the valuable papers during the Great Chicago Fire, turned his house into a shelter at the time. But before that, back in the 1850s and early 1860s, he was an operator on the Underground Railroad. Having escaped himself, he had a whole system worked out where people in Missouri could escape over to Alton, Illinois. Joseph had a brother in Alton. His brother would give him a place to stay there. Joseph would come and get them the rest of the way to Chicago and either let them stay here or help them get onto Canada if they wanted to be that much safer. So how many people he might have saved this way, we really have no idea. But here's the other thing, is that as we've seen, there's this base for a marker in the next plot over. This is his family plot. This is where he's buried. He's actually kind of nearby this marker that is set up for him, which is in a whole different family plot. So this is the Gray family over here. But one thing, going over the lot records, it became apparent that Martha Stevens, the mother of Mrs. Gray, was originally buried over in the Hudlin family plot, until they could buy this one for themselves, which shows that the families must have been pretty well connected. Mrs. Stevens died, and Joseph said, "Oh, you can just bury her in my plot for a while." And then she was moved over to this one, and really the most logical explanation is that these seemingly random people who have markers over here in the Gray family plot might just be people that Joseph had helped to escape. For one thing, Mary and her daughter, Mrs. Gray, we know were a black family who came over from St. Louis, which is exactly in the right region. There's also this rather sad one for Willis Montgomery that also says Papa. Now this one, there's a typo on this one. It says that he was born in 1859. That's the year that he came to Chicago. He was born in 1829. Typos on gravestones are very common, or you may just say that he declared that his birth was the day that he became free when he got here to Chicago. And once again, we don't know very much about this guy other than that he was a black man who worked as a barber around Chicago, was somehow connected to these guys. Most logical thing is that maybe it's somebody that Joseph had helped to escape. It's one of those things we'll never really know. Most of Joseph's family is buried down at Lincoln Cemetery on the south side, which happens quite a bit when things go over the course of generations. He's got a couple of children in the plot with him as well who died. But this is one of my favorite mysteries to kind of untangle within it. When I realized that he wasn't buried in his own plot, the plot is just getting thicker and thicker and thicker. Pun absolutely intended. I would say pun not intended, but come on, the pun is always intended, even if you just stumble onto it at random. We're going to move up to the opposite corner here. This is the northeast corner of the cemetery, and this is the one that I have been covering the most right now, as I'm just knee-deep in research on this topic. Getting up to about 1,000 articles here, making arrangements to get stuff on Interlibrary alone, poking through the Fulton History newspaper archive, which is a whole lot of like manual typing and guessing and typing and guessing. Oh. But anyway, there's an unmarked space here next to this one with the stone that is the burial place of a woman by the name of Marie Steinbrecher, who died in late 1895, shortly after marrying Johann Hock, who at the time was operating, I believe, under the name of Joseph Huff or Jacob Huff. So one of the best pictures of him. So he had just come to the United States about 8 months before. He sailed in on a ship called the Stuttgart in January of 1895. Gave Chicago as his destination when he pulled into New York, but then proceeded on to Wheeling, West Virginia, where he started operating a saloon for a couple of months. And after a couple of months of operating that saloon, he married this widow by the name of Carolyn Hawk, whose name he eventually stole. She died a couple of months later under circumstances that some people found suspicious, like enough so that Hawk decided he needed to get out of town. So he faked his death. He left a whole bunch of clothing on the banks of the Ohio River and just disappeared. Nobody was fooled for a second. But at that point, he drifted to Chicago, got another saloon for himself over near the corner of North Milwaukee and Western, and through some friends met Julia Steinbrecher, who lived up on Belmont. They got married shortly thereafter. This is their wedding picture. Hawk is about 10 years younger than she was. He would have been about 35 at the time, and I think she was about 45. But that was fairly common. He tended to go after women who were about 10 years older than he was. But she began getting sick and started telling her friends that she had been poisoned. But when she died and the procession was on its way to Graceland, somebody tried to stop the procession, but Hawk had a doctor's note saying that she had died of nephritis, kidney disease, which just happens to be what you die of when you get arsenic poisoning. Now, at the time, arsenic was in embalming fluid, so there was really nothing they could do. It was the same case a couple of years later. They disinterred the body of the woman back in Wheeling, West Virginia, but there had been arsenic in the embalming fluid, so there was nothing they could do. Furthermore, somebody had already broken into that grave and stolen a couple of the vital organs, such as the stomach. So Hawk this is just the beginning of Hawk's career. It lasted for about another 10 years. He did a couple of years of that in the Bridewell, the old prison for minor offenses. But over the course of the next 10 years, he would kill, I would say, at least 3 more women that we can be fairly confident of, and marry over a dozen other women, most of whom he would just marry, take their money, and desert. But he ended up being one of our most prolific serial killers. And here's the thing. I've asked Graceland, I don't have as much access to the records as I did pre-pandemic, but I've asked him to look in the lot card, see what kind of burial case was used for Mrs. Steinbrecher, who was buried here under the name Maria Hawk. But if it's a sufficiently good burial case, the murder weapon, the arsenic, is presumably still there. See, arsenic is an element. It doesn't decompose down to anything else. It'll still be buried there to this day. All right, we're going to move on a little bit. Kristen, I don't know what you guys are talking about, but that sounds like one heck of a television show. We'll move on. We're just going to go inside of the gates here. This is one that normally is on the walking tour route, or at least pretty close to the walking tour route. But right now they've got this, they're redoing this whole entrance area. So it's going to look totally different when they reopen it in June. We've been opening the tours a couple of blocks north of here, which means we're also getting some stuff that's off of the walking route. But I'm hoping they'll, part of it, they might be able to showcase a little bit better the kind of hidden grave here of Colonel William Webb. This was maybe intended as a military section right here, but they only ended up giving it to William Webb, who died of typhoid fever very early on in the Civil War. They had offered that space for soldiers after the Battle of Shiloh, but the city decided to use Rose Hill instead. So they pulled a guy out of the vault who'd been waiting to be claimed and unclaimed, and offered it and just donated his space to him right there. Thomas the Train. Yeah, I never saw Thomas the Train, Kristen. That one's a little out of me. But I know George Carlin and Ringo Starr were involved, so that's all right by me. Now, over by the chapel here is the Columbarium. This is mostly a place for ashes. The most notable here is probably Marion Mahoney Griffith, the architect. I'm working on finding a way to pronounce that exactly right so that nobody will correct me. If I say Mahoney, people say, no, it's Mahoney. If I say Mahoney, the people say, no, that's an Irish name. It's pronounced Mahoney. I believe the correct one, the one that she used, was Mahoney. But if I pronounce it just a little bit in between those two. Good morning, Krista at MSI. Welcome along, everybody. Those of you just joining us, we're doing some Graceland stuff that doesn't usually come up on the walking tour just for geographical regions. Okay, Martin was, is Peter Falk there? No, it's a Columbo joke. Got it. Columbo's really been having a moment among young people these days. All right, so this is really one of my other favorites. This is Vincent Starrett, who was the book critic for the Chicago Tribune for a number of years. Not a lot of pictures of him. He's kind of hard to come across a photo. But he was a book critic for the Chicago Tribune. Carl Sandburg said he was a guy who could have lived in any era in United States history and would have been happy and well known. In addition to being a book critic, he also wrote a lot of mystery novels himself, and a whole lot of Sherlock Holmes criticism. You can see right on the grave here, there's this a copy of his old book plate that says, "It is always 1895. That was from a sonnet he wrote, 221B. Here though the world explode, these two survive, and it is always 1895. It's all about how Holmes and Watson can never die. There will never be a grave for them, because they always live in the nostalgic heart of our mind. And somewhere they're sitting there right now, while Moriarty plots his next deviltry, they take their well-worn ease, while the sea-coal flames burn upon the hearth. And it is always 1895. Now, in the late 1930s, he contributed to a book about Chicago murders. It was like an anthology of Chicago murder stories. And this is a picture from Marshall Fields when they did the book signing for that one. Now, signed copies by about half of the authors still come up occasionally. I never seem to have any luck snagging one in time. But this is a well-attended book signing. And this is Vincent sitting next to Nelise Child, who was better known as Lillian Colley back in the day. She was the woman who ran the Wind Blew Inn back when she was a teenage flapper. Judge sentenced her to read a book of fairy tales to cure her of her bohemian ideals after hauling her in for running a disorderly place. So here she is sitting with Vincent Starr. Later she became a mystery writer. She ended up writing a section for the book about Marble Mildred, the woman's name was, a woman who killed her husband. There's a great line in it, when a man kills his wife, he usually turns the gun on himself as well. When a woman kills her husband, she usually decides that that's enough for one day. I can't remember if I've covered Mildred on the Patreon. If not, I'll do it this week, perhaps. This afternoon, I got to do this week's Patreon posts. Let's move up. Now, this is one we could about get to on the walking around. It's just a little bit up the hill. There's this completely hard to read monument that I think was probably hard to read even when it was brand new, about 3 daughters of William Frederick DeWolf who had died in a steamship explosion back in the 1850s. And I'm not sure they were actually moved here or not. That we know that they moved this monument from the old city cemetery, but the lot card is a little bit unclear as to whether they were actually here. But William Frederick DeWolf was an abolitionist who moved up to Chicago from Alton, and his son, William Jr., is in here as well. He was killed in the Civil War, died at the home of Isaac Newton Arnold. There's a great line in the obituary, "Truly the dart of the insatiable archer has found a shining mark." But William continued to be active in politics for several decades. When he was a very old man and not really capable of getting out of bed on his own, he insisted on being carried to the polls so that he could vote, which might not even be legal in Georgia right now. But that's a role model for all of us. Very proud of my kid who was a part of that Gen Z voting wave that was so important this election. If people that age had been voting in these kind of numbers, we never would have been in this situation to begin with. I say lower the voting age. I've been paying taxes since I was 14. It still burns me up that I couldn't vote against Bob Dole. I paid my fair share. Rather sad marker here. And that's a girl named Miss, I think Laura Wolf. I think her first name was Laura. But over beyond that, we've got this one that you just kind of have to stumble upon. That is a book upon a pillow. You always put books on pillows on gravestones, never in real life. Like Shakespeare in his monument at Stratford is like writing on a pillow. Now, come on, man. That's nothing to bear down on. Now, looking at this full on, you can see that there's a signature on here. Trouble is, the signature is almost completely illegible. See if you can sound this out. What it says is Florence McLandberg. A very difficult thing to sound out. Florence McLandberg was just a teenager when she started writing here in Chicago. She wrote a very early example of a science fiction book collection by a woman. Really a very early collection of science fiction stories to begin with. It was called The Automaton Ear. The title story of it is about a guy who invents a device that allows you to hear things from backwards in time. And then kind of goes mad. It's very, very Edgar Allan Poe influenced. If you search The Automaton Ear, you can find a couple of things about her and a couple of things about you can find the book itself without any trouble at all. Now, during World War I, she was writing patriotic poetry out of her house in Michigan. And thereafter, she mostly wrote letters to the editor. These letters to the editor would kind of walk back from the patriotic poetry, saying nobody really won the war, and nobody's really going to win unless we get rid of all of these weapons we have created. She also spoke about things like racial justice and things about criticizing organized religion. There was one person who wrote in saying, I always enjoy the letters from Florence McLandberg, but clearly she is a product of modern education and has not yet learned the softening influence of religion. Somebody else wrote it. You know she's like 80, right? Not a problem of modern education at all. I'm going to move over here a little bit. Rodney, that year Bob Dole was railing against Nine Inch Nails and The Simpsons and everything else that I loved. All right, here we got Henry Rhines. I would never actually go out of my way to go to this guy's grave on a tour. We don't really know what this guy looked like. We know his son, Dump Rhines, looked like this. This is probably about how he looked, though in the 1840s he would not have had a mustache. Henry Rhines was 1/3 of the Chicago Police Department all by himself in the 1840s, arrested the first convicted murderer in Chicago, but mostly used his time as a police officer to arrest people that he thought might be fugitive enslaved people who were escaping from down south. A New York newspaper described him as a degraded, drunken wretch at one point. And later on, he actually killed a guy himself. Some bartender said, hey, you shouldn't have arrested that friend of mine. They got to fighting. Henry shot him, disappeared to New Orleans, was captured again, and somehow the whole thing must have blown over because he was right back to the slave-catching beat shortly thereafter. So this is one of the graves where I kind of run out of dance moves when I got to this guy's grave. So I just kind of did the hand jive. Born to hand jive, baby, on the graves of people who deserve it, baby. And speaking of guys who deserve it, this is one of several McCormick family lots. The McCormicks are scattered all over the cemetery, even though each individual of the McCormick lots probably has enough space for all of them. But they didn't like each other very much. So, and that's really One thing on which I agree with them, these guys were awful. This is William McCormick, a brother of Cyrus McCormick, the inventor of the mechanical reaper. William not only claimed it was really their father who invented it and he should have gotten most of the money, but this is a guy who quit going to church because the preacher was giving anti-slavery sermons. He and his brother Leander, and really to a lesser extent Cyrus, pretty openly supported the South during the Civil War. Later got to be buddy-buddy with, Leander and Cyrus got to be buddy-buddy with Robert E. Lee. William was dead by the time the war ended, so. But one person I'm always happy to like shove him out of the spotlight at his own plot when we come by this one, as we occasionally get here on the walking route. As elsewhere in the plot is a guy who married his granddaughter. Never would have met the guy. It was a guy by the name of Herbert Stewart Stone. I first found out about Herbert Stewart Stone reading the diaries of Irma Frankenstein. And she was reminiscing about this kid who was in her class in school decades ago, Herbert Stewart Stone. She remembered there was a day when the teacher had them all write a theme. Like, I want you to write a theme. Nobody ever told me to write a theme. But it was a theme about the waste paper basket. And most of the kids wrote something about the waste paper basket is this high, it is this round, it is full of paper, it sits next to the desk. Herbert wrote a monologue from the waste paper basket's point of view, saying he hated to disagree with the teacher, but he actually thought some of the essays and themes that she threw into him were pretty good. He didn't like the apple cores. He asked kids to stop throwing apple cores inside of it. And Irma remembered we all talked about it as a thing. He gave that waste paper basket a soul. And naturally, he came from a literary family. His father, Melville Stone, had been manager of the Chicago Daily News and later the founder of the Associated Press. He himself grew up to be a publisher. He founded a House Beautiful magazine. There was a publishing company that he ran that became Rudyard Kipling's publisher in the United States. But then he ended up dying on the Lusitania. That was a passenger ship heading from the UK back to the States that the Germans thought in pre-World War I days was loaded with weapons, so they sank it along with all the people who were on it. It was part of the reason we ended up entering World War I in the United States. Now, later investigations have shown that, yes, there were in fact weapons on there. It possibly was a legitimate target, but the German government ended up making payments to Mr. Stone's widow. And his body is actually buried here, too. His body was actually recovered. It washed up onto the shore in Ireland. Speaking of sad stories, we actually covered this one yesterday. We hardly ever do. Well, this is a rather sad statue. This was Mary Fraley Watson lost a son and her brother in the same house on the same day to different diseases. Hard to imagine how bad that day must have been, but they must have known it was coming because about a week before they had purchased this family plot. And Mary was involved with a lot of local social clubs and art supporting clubs, so she probably through those knew Nellie Verne Walker, a protege of Laredo Taft, who did the Eternal Silence statue here. And it was through their efforts that, most likely through those club associations, she hired Nellie Verne Walker to do this statue. Which is one of the kind of underrated statues at Graceland Cemetery, I think. Move on around. We actually went to this one yesterday, too. There's one thing about having this new opening, is we do get to go to some new places. And this one is about to be marked pretty soon. We at least passed this one. The red one here is for George Dewey, who was a police officer who was the police liaison to the Newsies, the kids who sold newspapers. And he was like personally trying to arrange for them to learn how to read, which helps if you're a newsie. Getting them shoes, getting them coats in the winter times. The newsboys, the kids who hung around in the alleys grabbing newspapers to sell, were largely homeless. They were largely self-sufficient, unsupervised kids just kind of living in the alley, making their living by buying 100 papers for 50 cents and selling it for $1, if they could sell all of them. But elsewhere in this section is a grave that they're working on marking now for Sarah Good, the inventor. Now, there's a lot of articles out there saying that Sarah Good was the first black woman to get a United States patent, which she was pretty close. They were a little bit hasty. A couple of earlier examples have since been identified. But she invented a bed that folded into a cabinet. Now, it wasn't the first folding bed. That's another thing you'll see online is that she invented the folding bed. She invented a folding bed. They'd been around for centuries by then. But this was a rather good one by all accounts. And I think she actually invented more than one of them, though she only took out the one patent. She and her husband, Archie, operated a furniture store on State Street in the basement of a medical school. Now, she was able to get a lot of lines of credit for it herself. This is actually a signature of hers that I got in the legal archives. She got lines of credit from Marshall Field. She got lines of credit from a lot of different places without her husband co-signing, which in that era is really pretty remarkably rare. But unfortunately, the reason we know this is they weren't able to pay most of them back. There was a flood in the medical college that wrecked all of their stock of furniture. But this is one that we're working on getting marked now. Another one that's too close to the front, a little off of the route. We could probably walk over and see this guy sometime. I got interested in this just because it's such a great name. Weldon Cobb. Now, Weldon J. Cobb was a children's book author. He wrote for the Stripmeyer Syndicate, the same syndicate that did like the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. So I don't know how to tell you guys this, but every children's book series you've ever read is probably dreamed up in a marketing room. But he wrote a lot of things like this series, The Protector of Finance, Tales of Resilius Marvel, Guardian of Bank Treasure, and more famously, the Dashaway series about a young pilot, Dashaway Air Champion, or Dashaway and his hydroplane, which he wrote under the name Roy Rockwood. But here's the cool thing about him, what I would think is the cool thing, is in the 1860s and 1870s, when he was just a young man, he was really into getting in fights with sex workers. He had quite the scandalous backstory. Any number of different people he was attached to, including famous ones whose skulls ended up at the Whitechapel Club. And it's kind of like a precursor, I guess, in a way, to Shel Silverstein, who lived in the basement of the Playboy Mansion, back when children's book authors could do that kind of stuff. These days, you just get raked over the coals on Twitter for stuff like that. We're going to move on up and just check out a couple of interesting epitaphs. This is something I sometimes point out as kind of an example of my style and my philosophy with this stuff. Like right over here, near Superintendent Chalmers, you've got this guy whose gravestone says that he was Secretary of the United States Treasury under President Taft. Then back behind him is Lillian Julia Davenport Partak, who has a Smashing Pumpkins lyric on her gravestone. Lily, my one and only. She died of breast cancer in 2013. She was a graphic designer. Once said that all she knew about typography, she learned from watching The Price is Right. And this is just kind of my philosophy. There's one person who's the Secretary of the Treasury, one person who has a Smashing Pumpkins lyric on their gravestone. Between the two, I am way more interested in finding out about the Smashing Pumpkins lady. Well, I was just going to show off some of the other interesting epitaphs here. Now, Graceland isn't really known as a place with a lot of fantastic epitaphs. This isn't like an 18th century graveyard or even like Town of Maine Cemetery where people get way creative. Like this is Joseph Schuttler, whose epitaph is, "Ha! Was that it?" It is very rare that you see a 1990s vintage mullet on a gravestone. And this other one that I pointed out many times. It's over in the plot of a Mr. Heegard, who was a cigar maker. But this is an example of like the family sold back the rest of the family plot to be used for individual graves. Such as this one for Joseph Jude McCaskey, with a smiley face and a peace sign, and the epitaph, "He was tidy, love yourself." Instead of born and died at his sunrise and sunset, and you notice there is no sunset here because Jude is still alive. I've never been able to get a hold of him to ask him about this, but his mother owns the Chicago Bears. It's that McCaskey family. And also right behind there, there's also this one that says "Rock On," over in the same plot. Or over across from it. Yeah, behind it. Just over here is Daniel Hale Williams, who worked at Providence Hospital here in Chicago and is generally known as perhaps the most famous black surgeon of his era. Back in the 1890s, a guy came into Providence Hospital named James Cornish who had just been stabbed with what newspapers described as a sailor's knife. And upon looking into the situation, Dr. Williams realized that that knife had punctured his heart. So he ended up performing, like timing the stitches to the beat of the guy's heart. He managed to stitch it back up, which was at the time, as far as anybody knew, was the first successful open heart surgery that had ever been performed. It was really quite a newspaper item at the time. Now, I did a segment on this for like Mysteries at the Museum or one of those shows. They wanted me to like play up the drama. I was like, Dr. Williams knew that this was risky, that he had to move fast. So like, no, this wasn't risky. This guy was dead. By all, if you got stabbed in the heart, that was pretty much it. Trying to sew his heart back up was not necessarily a high-risk situation because you're already working off of a floor where the guy was dead. It was a high-reward situation, but given that he was already dead where he stood, it would be considered low risk. But a year later, he was back and working in quarries. Now, I think there's some dispute as to whether this was really the first open heart surgery. I'm always hesitant to call anything the first anything. It's certainly the first that anybody knew about at the time. Let's move over here just a bit. This one's fairly well known, the baseball one. You know right away that this is a baseball guy. It's got all the names of the teams who are in the National League. This is William Hulbert, who is the founder of the National League, author of a book of baseball rules that endured for decades at a time when nobody thought you could write one rule book that would last for more than a year. And also generally considered to be the source of one of the best quotations out there about Chicago. He's said to have claimed, "I would rather be a lamppost in Chicago than a millionaire in any other town." I've repeated that many times. I like other towns too. But every now and then I'll be ripping on Trump on TikTok and somebody will say, well, that's why he's living it up at Mar-a-Lago while you're just a Chicago tour guide. I would rather have just about any job in Chicago than be a millionaire in Mar-a-Lago. We'll just move on back behind here. Here's a fairly famous guy himself in his day. This is William D. Kerfoot, who ran a real estate office in Chicago at the time of the Great Chicago Fire. Famously, after the fire, he quickly rebuilt something out of whatever scrap wood he could get ahead of to start another real estate office, which featured the sign, "All gone but wife, children, and energy." This became kind of emblematic of just how quickly the Chicago was able to rebuild itself, just the spirit with which we rebuilt the city. I got a little more time. Let's cover out just a little bit more here. This one. First, we're going to follow this coyote. You see that guy off in the distance there? And Adam, you can get t-shirts of that from Chicago for Chicagoans, has rather be a lamppost t-shirts. Well, this one, I always kind of use this little patch here to point me to this one that I try to find occasionally. I always tend to lose it in the middle of the field. But it's kind of a mystery grave. Down over here in the Ware family plot, in the Graham family plot, is this marker to John Weir, which mentions he was lost at sea April 14th, 1912, SS Titanic. According to a landlord at the hotel in London, he had been saying, "I'm not sure I should get on that ship. I just have a bad feeling about it." And this was published only a couple of days after the ship went down. It's not as interesting as if it had been published before the ship went down. But still, it's a very early account of having one of those premonitions. Now, his body was not recovered. This is a cenotaph that is just in the Graham family plot. And what his connection to the Grahams was, I've never been able to determine. It's just one of those mysteries. But it's one of two Titanic plots here at Graceland Cemetery, the other being up behind Isaac Newton Arnold. This one I've shown a couple of times, but it's tricky to show off an epitaph like this. You got to get everybody up the hill and crowded around. First, you've got Emily Ryerson, the daughter of the Ryerson Steele family, who is buried in Boston. And just to the right of her is Arthur Ryerson, a nephew of E.C. Larned, the abolitionist lawyer. I'll make this one a bit bigger. It says there, he and his wife were, and most of his family were over in Europe when they found out that their adult son had been killed in one of those newfangled automobiles in April of 1912. So they hastened back to the funeral on the fastest ship they could get, which was the Titanic. And this one is a cenotaph. He was last seen on the deck of the ship laughing about the fact that the band was still playing, cracking jokes with some other guys. He was able to help his wife and the kids get onto the lifeboats, though. There's a famous scene in A Night to Remember, the 1950s movie, where a 13-year-old kid's about to get on the boat, and the guy says, no, he can't come. And the man says, well, of course he can go with his mother. He's only 13, which was exactly the way that it went down. Yeah, by most accounts, we would call the Titanic the RMS, but once it got into the States, I guess we would have called it the SS. I don't know that much about how ships operate. But one more I think we should hit that I just always like to hit on a day like today. Governor Altgeld became governor of the state in 1893 and famously decided to pardon the Haymarket anarchists who were still in prison. Because there was absolutely no proof that they had been the ones who threw the bomb at the Haymarket rally. In fact, some of them certainly weren't even there that day. They put a couple of his better quotes all over the thing. If the defendants had a fair trial, there ought to be no interference, for no punishment under our laws could then be too severe. But they did not have a fair trial. The evidence utterly fails to connect the unknown who threw the bomb with the defendants, and I am convinced that it is my duty to act. Another great one. Mentioned to President Cleveland in 1894 during the Pullman strikes, when President Cleveland was sending in the troops to fight down the Pullman strikers. Under the laws, you assume it is to be a president, though through any of his appointees can apply himself to have the military sent into any city and base his application on such representations as he sees fit. This assumption is new, and I submit that it is not the law of the land. The jurists tell us this is a government of law, not a government by caprice of an individual. Some other ones. The doctrine that might makes right has covered the earth with misery. While it crushes the weak, it also destroys the strong. Every deception, every cruelty, every wrong reaches back sooner or later and crushes its author. Justice is moral health, bringing happiness. Wrong is moral disease, bringing moral death. Compromisers, traitors, and neutral men never correct abuses, never find or save free institutions, and never fight for human rights. And Republican institutions and government, by injunction, cannot both exist in the same country. They are opposite in character, and one or the other must die. So many great lines from Governor Altgeld. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, really, I got this upcoming tour thing, but I haven't added one for Thursday yet, so it's just basically kind of a blank. We just got some morning tours coming up here after. So in any case, we're just going to put the Benny Goodman back on. Well, I promised you guys I was going to show off some of the Sick Fisher stuff from the past couple of days. So this is what it looked like on the inside of the Sick Fisher exhibition that several of us went to yesterday. Some others of you know Sick from our Mural Monday tours. He's got murals all over the city that make the building look like it's part of a Nintendo game. Makes it look like you're inside of a Nintendo game. There was this terrific one. This particular exhibition was mostly paintings he did of his favorite cartoon scenes, things that influenced him in his art. I got there a little bit too late to buy his Scooby-Doo rendition. But here's a whole crowd of happy Mysterians hanging out here. We brought quite a crowd to see Sick. And this is a very rare shot of me showing my teeth. You don't get that much. Now, the exhibition is still going on for a month or two. And he also set up like the whole atrium area, the whole interior. Here's the building on Chicago Avenue, Chicago Trueborn. You can see just a little in this shot. Octavio got one of the eyeball umbrellas. I think I got a clearer shot of this. There's this one anyway. There's the other side. I can hear this painting. We're ready to party, we're ready. I hope you bring lots of spaghetti. And here's me with Sick. He recognized me when I came in. We've done so many Mural Mondays where we actually feature him painting. And here is the painting I bought. I'm an art collector now. All right. So with that, everybody, we will put the Benny Goodman on and just hang out. So thanks for joining me, everybody. Here we go. Oh yeah, Uncle Dave would like a lot of the stuff in there. There's some great Looney Tunes stuff on the other wall. Do I have shots of that? Let me see what else I got here. Most of my shots are of the other wall. There's also some art by Anthony Llewellyn in there. And some other people that we featured. And some others that we will feature. Oh, Chris, you got the Michigan J Frog. Awesome. We bought quite a bit of the show, I think. We Mysterians. It was nice to meet the curator, too. I got to talk to her a little bit more. Get some more ideas of where to go. More leads on who else we could talk. Could I commission him to do another Scooby-Doo? I thought of that on the way home, but I already bought my piece. Ein Bedma, Lisa. I guess more properly they just say Bibakasha. Please is also thank you. I'm not sure if all of the stuff sold, but quite a lot of it had already sold in the pre-show when we got there. I was glad there was something left for me to snag. Yep, this is me, art collector. I'll probably put it right here. And the green matches the room pretty well. Thank you for that tip, Eleanor. Thank you for telling everybody. So we're kind of back on the schedule right now that I've had for a while of Sunday morning. I just pick one of the tours at random to do.
Popular tune, Thanks a Million.
But later today, today or early tomorrow, I've got to do the Patreon post, and I'll get something up for Thursday night as well. Now, I wasn't really thinking of it matching the room, but really, I think it goes next to it would go next to Nighthawks very well. That green. There's also, we got the green of the chair over back here. The green on the wall, on the curtains. Let's go see the cats, in fact. Rather than waking them up, we'll just go see them ourselves here. There they are. They're just kind of hanging out over here. Miles, you're contractually obligated. Give us a look. Hey, Priya. Priya, you want to say hi to the nice people? Sicking up the storage shed. That works. It'd be kind of cool to paint the storage shed to look like a cartoon.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about it. Trucking.
Well, now Miles is hopping up onto the desk. Is that right, Miles? Is that correct? Well, that tooth in my desk, that's right here. Not too early to show that thing. Thanks to those of you who like the bats. We do keep the bats up year round. We got a few more of them around Halloween time. All right, I'm going to finish up cleaning up this space today so I can actually relax in the room a little bit. Yeah, Miles knows the routine. Like, oh, sorry, I was asleep, but I know where I'm supposed to go. Come on, hang on. Oh yeah, hop on up here, Miles. Whoa, Miles, you're always knocking down the Bruce Springsteen over here. Edwina, yeah, there'll probably be a tree.
Benny Goodman presents On the
TikTok
Yellow.
Kitty. I don't know. Miles, you want to try TikTok Kitty? That's more of a Charlotte trick. Maybe you'd like it too now. Is it TikTok? TikTok, 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 TikTok. Now Miles is not as into TikTok Kitty. And Chris, I've heard the new Soul album. It doesn't do that much for me. I'm always in favor of any artist doing a vanity project. I usually like a vanity project better than whatever they think we want next. But, yeah. I'll show you my latest autograph thing. Hang on. Maisie Peters wrote those of us who got the VIP upgrade thank you notes. So that was cool. I'd never gotten the VIP upgrade at a concert before. It wasn't usually an option when I was younger. It's kind of a new thing. It's usually so much money. Maisie's was not that expensive. Like, not now anyway, but she said, I feel like this might be the only chance I get to see her in the small venue. She's going to get bigger. In the summer, she does stadiums with Ed Sheeran. Do kitties still play with the feather stick? Yes, if I let them, but once they get started, they just get to be impossible with it. Alright, well, I'm starting to get hungry now. I'm trying to, like, brainstorm what do we have in the house for food right now. I'm making my way through the leftovers pretty well. Miles, do you want to do some jumping? I owe you some jumping.
Eeny, meeny, miny,
It's been a while since I let you
Here
really
Monroe,
jump.
the Congress Hotel in Chicago, and some more to
Let's do some jumping this
Benny
afternoon.
Goodman's orchestra, and here's
Okay.
Helen Ward sing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
Thanks, Christine. Well, all right, everybody. Time for me to go have some lunch. And we'll be back tomorrow with another Mural Monday. Might do a redo. I feel like doing a Sick Fisher right now, for obvious reasons. But thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Telling everybody to stay safe and stay strong, but most of all, ladies and gentlemen, Miles will help you to stay spooky. Thanks, everybody.